Watch what happens when a super GM runs out of time in a complicated endgame. Welcome back, guys! We are looking at a huge game from the Speed Chess Championship semifinals between Alireza Firouzja and Hikaru Nakamura. You need to watch this because it perfectly illustrates how one ambitious pawn break can completely ruin your position if you haven't calculated the consequences. d4, knight f6, c4, white grabs space in the center. Now, usually we see black play e6 to go for a queen's gambit declined, or maybe g6 for a king's Indian, but Hikaru plays c6. This signals the Slav defense. It's incredibly solid, like hitting a brick wall. Bishop f4. Alireza chooses a setup that looks a bit like a London system, but much more active because he already pushed his c-pawn. Black could play d6 here to keep things closed. Instead, black plays d5 immediately, striking back in the center. White has a few standard developing moves here. Knight f3 is classic, or simply trading pawns on d5. Alireza goes for e3. He supports his center but locks that bishop outside the pawn chain, which is good. Here, casual players might just play e6, or maybe bring the bishop out to f5. Hikaru plays a6. This is a very modern, high-level move. It looks slow, but it prepares to expand on the queen side with b5 later and just waits to see what white does. We pick it up with white developing the knight to c3, fighting for control of the center immediately. Hikaru lashes out with the b-pawn. He's challenging white's control and space on the queen side instantly. Firouzja snaps off that pawn on d5. He spent about 40 seconds here, clearly calculating the tension in the center. Black captures back. So now we have a very symmetrical, rigid pawn structure in the center, but the pieces are about to fly. Rook to c1. White puts the rook on the open file. Classic positional play. Hikaru plays bishop b7, fianchettoing the bishop on the long diagonal. Knight to f3. Simple, natural development from Alireza. Pawn to e6. Hikaru is just solidifying the center and opening lines for his dark-squared bishop. Bishop to d3, white is developing aggressively, aiming that bishop right at the king's side. Black develops the bishop to e7, preparing to castle. Knight to e5. I love this. He plants the knight on an outpost where it's super annoying to remove without weakening the black position. Hikaru castles, getting the king to safety. Queen to f3. Firouzja is lifting the queen, maybe eyeing a kingside attack. Black brings the other knight out to d7, challenging that strong knight in the center. White castles. Both kings are tucked away, and we are officially moving out of the opening. The real fight begins now. Rook to c8. Black contests the c-file. Queen to h3. She joins the attack, eyeing the kingside. Pawn to g6. A necessary evil to stop checkmate threats, but remember this. Every pawn move creates a permanent weakness. Now the dark squares around the king are soft. Knight retreats to f3. Firouzja thought for 30 seconds here. The computer calls this an inaccuracy because it relieves the pressure, but humans aren't machines. Knight to h5, hunting down white's dark-squared bishop. Hikaru wants to remove the attacker. Bishop to h6. White saves the bishop and pokes at the rook. It's annoying. The rook steps aside to e8. Knight to e2. White is maneuvering, maybe wanting to reroute to f4 to attack those weak dark squares. Bishop back to f8. Hikaru wants to trade off white's active piece. It's a bit passive, but safe. White takes the bishop. Trading is usually good for the side that is cramped, but here white is just happy to damage the structure. Rook takes back on f8. g4! Alireza says, I don't care about safety, I am coming for you. This is aggressive play, lunging at the knight. The knight has to retreat to f6. Knight to f4. He's piling up pieces on the king's side. You can feel the attack brewing. Black trades rooks on c1. Hikaru spent a minute and a half here, in a speed game. That is a huge time investment. Rook takes back. Now white owns the only open file on the board. Queen to b8, a waiting move, keeping an eye on the e5 square. Queen to h4. Firouzja spent a full minute here. He is winding up for a knockout punch. Pawn to e5. Oh no, this is a blunder. Hikaru tries to break out in the center, but he just opens up lines exactly when his king is vulnerable. You can't do this. At this point, I think it would have been better to move the queen to d6 to hold things together. White takes the pawn. Thank you very much. Black takes the knight. Queen takes on f6. Look at white's queen dominating the board now. The king is practically naked. Knight takes g4. Hikaru grabs a pawn back, but his position is in ruins. Queen to g5, attacking the knight and pinning pieces. It's getting ugly for black. Pawn to f5, trying to secure the knight, but it weakens the king even further. It's desperation. Pawn to h3, simple chess. Kick the active piece away. The knight has to go back to f6. Bishop takes f5. Boom. The tactic works because the g-pawn is pinned to the king. Firouzja is crushing him. King to h8, unpinning, but this is another blunder. The engine eval is screaming +5 for white. Better was to step the king to f7, though it's still miserable. Bishop back to d3. White missed a quicker win. He missed a chance to sack the knight on g6 immediately, but let's be honest, he is still winning by a mile. Queen to d6, trying to hold it together. Queen to e5, forcing a queen trade. This is a great practical decision. When you are winning, trade pieces, not pawns. We are heading into a winning endgame for Alireza. Black is forced to take the queen. Pawn takes back. Now look at that pawn on e5. It's a passed pawn. It cramps black. It's a monster. Knight to e8. The knight is forced to a passive square to block the pawn. Knight to e6. Look at the difference in piece activity. White's knight is a king. Black's knight is a peasant. Rook to f7. Knight to c5, attacking the bishop and the pawn. Firouzja is just torturing him now. Technically, the engine thinks this is a mistake, and I would have preferred to push the f-pawn to f4, but in a speed game, this is very human. Bishop retreats to c8. Hikaru is just suffering here. Pawn to h4, creating breathing room for the king and maybe preparing to march. Rook to c7, pinning the knight. Pawn to b4, cementing the knight. That knight is an octopus on c5. Knight to g7, trying to find a square, any square. Rook to c2, unpinning and getting ready to double up or switch files. Bishop to f5. Hikaru tries to trade off his bad bishop. Bishop takes bishop. A knight takes back. White is still completely winning, but Hikaru is slippery in time scrambles. Rook to d2, targeting the weak d-pawn. Knight to e7, passive defense again. Pawn to f4, Firouzja is just rolling his pawns down the board. Let's look at a better variation. White could have played pushing the pawn to create tension. Black would probably take the pawn, and the rook delivers a check. This position would look much better. Okay, now, let's get back to the game. King to g7, wait, look at the clock. Hikaru had literally 0 seconds left and panic played this move. He had to push the a-pawn, do anything but this. He just walked into a fatal fork. Knight to e6 check, it's a royal fork. He hits the king and the undefended rook on c7. That is a heartbreaking blunder in time trouble, and the game is over. What a tragic end for Nakamura in time trouble, but Firouzja played that beautifully. The big takeaway here is how dangerous it is to open the center with a move like e5 when your pieces aren't coordinated. Firouzja moved on to the final to face Magnus after this performance. Let me know in the comments if you would have spotted that final fork.